I'm Fred McClymans, one of the analysts here at Futurum Research. On behalf of the teams at Futurum and at Moor Insights and Strategy, we welcome you to the 6.5 Summit. In this keynote, featured in our CHIPS track, I'm excited to introduce Jim Elliott from Samsung. Jim is the Senior VP in the Samsung Memory, Sales and Marketing Division, and you might say he's up to his elbows in all things memory. Jim is going to take us through how memory is actually at the heart of the accelerated wave of digital transformation that we're living through today, and how it's impacting how we work, educate, entertain, shop, and even play, often in ways we don't even realize. And with that, let's get to Jim.
Hey everyone, it's Jim Elliott here. I'm the corporate senior vice president of memory sales and marketing at Samsung Semiconductor, and I'm super excited to be here at keynoting at the 6.5 Summit. So thanks to Dan Newman and all the organizers, and really excited to be here. I wish I could be giving this keynote to everybody in person, but I think that's the name of the game that we're all living in right now. So this is the next best thing. So let's go ahead and then have some fun and make the most of it here. So let's go to the next slide. So the title of my talk is Digital Transformation Accelerated. And again, so the lots of digital transformations we've already seen. Obviously, there's some acceleration happening because of the COVID-19 situation. So let's dig a little bit deeper and find out what is going on. So a little bit of a housekeeping, just have to get through our safe harbor slide before I can dive into the material here. So I'm sure you guys are all speed readers, so you've all got through that already. But I want to kind of start out with a couple of what I think are really interesting quotes from some of the leaders in our industry that have talked about 2020. And from my perspective, some of the quotes I want to share with you here kind of sum everything up from my perspective. And really, this was one of the earliest quotes that came out. This was the CEO of Microsoft, Satya Nadella, and he said, "We've seen 2 years worth of digital transformation in 2 months." So really, if you think about what's happening, this really encapsulates all of these digital trends that have been happening and how this has been accelerated now because of the pandemic. Another quote, this was actually more recently, this was from Aaron Levy, the CEO of Box, and he mentions that 1,000,000 years, which gives it a nice sort of a cosmic time perspective there, we never thought one of the biggest catalysts or the biggest use cases driving the growth in the cloud would be a pandemic. So clearly, this is something that took us all sort of by surprise. And then lastly, I wanted to leave these little words of wisdom. I follow Conan O'Brien on Twitter, and I think he has some of the most brilliant ways of sort of encapsulating what's going on. And what he said, what he Googled in January, back in the good old days, right, was who directed Ford versus Ferrari, meaning you're having fun and you want to know who directed the movie that you enjoyed. And in May, he was Googling, can murder wasps get coronavirus? And again, I think that does a really good job of summing up kind of the psyche of the situation that we're all in right now. And so with that as kind of some context, I'd like to move into the material of my presentation now. Okay, so we've spent a lot of time at Samsung. I've given a lot of keynotes talking about this virtuous cycle of information technology. So we have this IT boom that's been going on for some time, and really there's a lot of different areas or facets to that. One is AI, another one is big data, the explosion of data, IoT and the edge, so more and more connected devices, the pervasiveness of cloud, and then recently now 5G. And all these things are sort of working symbiotically, if you will, to create this IT boom. Now, COVID is obviously accelerating the adoption of many of these existing IT trends. And then the question now, though, is how is technology and the technology that we're working on here as the world's #1 memory supplier in the semiconductor industry, how is this technology enabling society to adapt all these nuances and all these changes that have sort of been forced upon us because of this pandemic? Let's take a look at a couple of these different trends. We'll start with the obvious use case, which is telepresence. So this could be either giving a keynote, a shelter-in-place keynote like this. This could be your video conferencing and collaboration. This could be remote learning. A couple examples here. If you look at Zoom, it's up about 7 times just since February. And Microsoft Teams has seen their usage increase about 9 times since February. And so I think these things have all sort of become part and parcel of our daily lives here in tech and also in other industries and other verticals as we're all adapting to this new lifestyle. And, speaking of lifestyle, I think it's also brought out a lot of different creative ways for people to collaborate. A year ago, this never would have happened. I'm a big Foo Fighters fan and stumbled across this video that they had put together. It was what they're calling it a stay at home live lounge, which was a collaboration of, I want to say, 2 or 3 dozen different musicians where they sang times like these. And that I think right there is the perfect quote. Times like these, we learn to live again. So I give props out to my buddy Dave Grohl for that line. And I think every year that you hear that song, you're like, yeah, it's times like these. And then 2020, then you go, wow, it really is times like these. So I think this is a pretty timeless quote from a great song. And this is, I think, a neat way of how people are sort of adapting, and society is adapting to this pandemic. And really, at the end of the day, technology and IT are at the heart of a lot of these use cases. So, speaking of adapting and innovating, this is another interesting phenomenon. This was a virtual choir that happened just a few weeks ago. And the director here, Eric Whitaker, they basically came up with over 17,000 participants in this virtual choir. And he's done a couple of these choirs in the past, but now because of the shelter in place and the pandemic, the numbers that they had this time were just off the charts. And so this just debuted recently. If you haven't seen it, it's a pretty incredible thing. But the takeaway here is the irony that they had is they were actually hoping that the participation numbers would be low because on the back end there's so much work to put all this together. So I think maybe in the future, as those participants grow, there may be some AI added to this from a curation standpoint, because as Eric talks about it in this interview, they actually curate these songs or these participants one at a time by a human. And so I think for that to scale, they may need to be looking at AI for the next version of Sing. So let's see what happens there. But again, some exciting work to see how society is adapting and using technology to connect us in these very unconnected times. All right, so stay home and watch, right? That's shelter in place. And so let's see what people are doing with all that free and idle time when you're not commuting and you have a much more efficient lifestyle, right? Well, you look at the Netflix subscribers. They basically added 26 million new subscribers in the first half of 2020. And to put that in context, in all of 19, they added 28 million new subscribers. So obviously, sheltering in place and streaming video is going to be a huge killer app and an outcome of the pandemic. And then look at on the Disney Plus side, almost 500,000 app downloads in one weekend, driven by the Hamilton release. And that number was almost double what their previous 4 week average was. So I think we're going to see a lot more of these movie releases going simultaneous release, because if they can't go into the theater, they're going right to streaming. And we're seeing forecasts that are showing streaming users expected to potentially double in 2020 versus 2019. Just what the doctor ordered. So telepresence, and now it's taken on telehealth. And so this is something that was just not really, it was available, but it wasn't very widespread or practiced. Now they're showing growth rates of potential 7x by 2025. So for all those non-essential type visits, again, shelter in place is driving basically an explosion in telemedicine, if you think about it. And now there's even more apps that are popping up in place for more specialized access and symptoms, uploading photos, going to apps. So I think the entire medical community is going to be embracing this whole telepresence model for the foreseeable future, because there's a lot of efficiencies that can be derived from this as well, without actually having to go into the office every single time for a follow-up visit, for example. Let's take a quick look at digital commerce now. And the tagline here is digital commerce, that capability is really central to the entire retail industry. And if you look at the graph on the left-hand side of the slide, you can see the penetration of e-commerce has been pretty steady for the last, say, 10 or 12 years. And then you have this hockey stick that started in April, where now we're at about 27%. And I'm sure that number may potentially gravitate higher depending on how long some of the shelter in place lasts. And so, bottom line is these are trends that started years ago, but COVID-19 has now changed retail forever. There's actually a lot of services that offer turnkey e-tail solutions for different retail businesses, things like Shopify. And so these are foundationally important to established retail businesses that need to have an online presence in order to offset some of the revenue challenges that they may be having with a decline in foot traffic. And the other thing, I don't know about anyone watching this video, but a lot of people out there making TikTok videos. Maybe not some of y'all, but some of your teenage children, perhaps. And what's happening now is a lot of the influencers that are out there on TikTok or on Facebook Live, they're actually able to monetize some of the things. So they could be wearing a hat, a shirt, or some shoes. And there's now lots of buy links or buy here or buy now, shop now links on those respective apps, so that you can then monetize a lot of those platforms now. And so this allows, again, the whole transformation of retail to happen, not only from going from brick and mortar to e-tail, and also allowing social media influencers to sort of reshape what that whole advertising and digital commerce landscape looks like. All right, gaming. Lots and lots of gaming going on in shelter in place. And actually speaking, it was interesting. In 2008, we actually saw a boom in gaming as well during the financial crisis, because when people aren't spending as much money, they're kind of hunkered down. They spend a lot of money on gaming as opposed to taking the family on an expensive vacation somewhere across the country or to an exotic location. So if you look at some of the statistics here on the left, music streaming is up a bit. Maybe people are listening to their favorite Foo Fighter song as they're working from home or whatever your music is. Video streaming is up about 40%, but gaming traffic on the internet up 75%. So that's a big change year over year from April of 20 to April of 19. So this is a lot of where the eyeballs are in 2020 during shelter in place. And if you think about the platform that where gamers are hanging out and what they're using, 25% console, about the same for PC, and a little bit more than 50% now is mobile. And that's a big paradigm shift, and we'll talk some more about that on the coming slides. So we're looking at about 2.6 billion mobile gamers. That's a huge number in 2020. And again, just think about the IT infrastructure and the amount of hardware and software that it's going to take to connect all these gamers in these online communities. One of the interesting things now is what we're calling the Netflix for gamers, which is a cloud-based gaming sort of platform. And there's a whole bunch of new products and companies that are targeting this. You can see I have a group of logos there off to the right, including Stadia, Hatch, and Shadow. And really what this is, it allows anybody with a controller of any kind, even a mouse, tablet, phone, to have instant access to an online library of games. Now, traditionally, this had really just been for casual gamers because of a latency, right? Because you have to have that instantaneous feedback from the controller to where you have movement on the screen and your eye can see what's happening. With 5G, however, that's going to eliminate the majority of that latency, which could potentially open up the door for hardcore gamers. And so this is a big trend we want to pay attention to. Already, this Netflix for gaming, if you will, as a business model, has predicted to be double revenue in 2020 compared to 19, with pretty robust growth going into 2023. All right, so speaking of 5G, let's take a quick look. We can go down memory lane here and talk about where 5G has been, and now look out and see where it's going. And it is going to go beyond the phone, but I'm going to start with the phone to paint the picture. So If you look at the continuum at the top, you basically go from voice to text, then you layer in apps and data, then you layer in tons of data, and 5G is really a game changer here for us. So let's take a look at speed, for example. So think of the movie download time. 6 minutes. Now, of course, with 4G, that's a first world problem. But 6 minutes, you're not going to sit around and wait 6 minutes for a movie to download. If you're like me, you're going to go get a cup of coffee. You're going to go and I don't know, maybe take out the trash. You can fold laundry. You can unload the dishwasher, get a couple errands done, right? 6 minutes, you're not sticking around. 5G, 3.6 seconds, right? You're not going to do any of that stuff. So, good news and bad news there. But you're going to watch the meter, 3.6 seconds, done. You've got your 2 hour movie locked and loaded. You're ready to go. Maybe you're jumping on a flight. No matter what, that's a pretty quick access time for a movie of that long length. Latency. Again, you're looking at about a fifth, that's called a 10 to 50x improvement on latency. And this is going to be critical for sort of AI based decisions. We could be in an autonomous car, for example. And then also, as we talked about on the previous slide, for gaming, if you can eliminate that latency, you can have a centralized or a cloud based gaming architecture without that delay from the controller to the feedback with lots and lots of concurrent users. Then the last point is the adoption. The time to a billion users took 12 years for 3G, and you can see 4G about 4 years, predicting about 3.5 years for 5G. So lots and lots of interest here. And I think to sum it up, I saw a really nice quote recently. It says the 4G to 5G experience, for those of y'all that remember a flip phone, it's kind of like what was going from a flip phone to a smartphone. Once the 5G infrastructure is completely built out, all the software, all the apps, all the infrastructure in place, it's going to be a completely different experience. And so we're very excited as an industry to have that 5G experience roll out widespread. Parlaying 5G into autonomous driving. A lot of times you do need 5G to be able to have this what we call V to X, which is a vehicle to everything. And so autonomous driving we do see is becoming a reality. I don't know if anyone has been in an autonomous vehicle, but it's I would call it a pretty mind blowing experience to see the steering wheel turning itself with no human intervention. I had an opportunity to ride in a self driving car about a year ago, and it was kind of a game changer for me. So you see all the different things here: V to P, vehicle to pedestrian; V to I, vehicle to infrastructure; V to N, which is the network; and V to V, vehicle to vehicle. All these things would be happening in real time, and 5G is going to serve as an accelerant to that. This is one of my favorite quotes. I was going to put it at the front, but I thought it would fit here perfectly. This was on one of the recent calls with Elon Musk. And he says, I'm very confident about the full self-driving functionality being complete by the end of this year. And it's because I'm literally driving it. So good for you, Mr. Musk. And we're rooting for you here to get that infrastructure built out here with your Tesla fleet. So exciting things going on there. IoT. Again, IoT is one of the other big pillars that we pay attention to in terms of that the overall IT boom that we talked about. And you can see the y-axis here. Those are some pretty big numbers. We're looking at almost 25 billion connected devices in 2020. And if you zoom in on M2M, which is the blue part at the bottom, we've exploded that for you on the right. And you can see the different areas because that is one of the fastest growing segments. So that's connected home and connected work and then connected health. Again, this is all pre-COVID. So it'll be interesting to see if the slope of some of these graphs starts to increase here in the coming months as a result of the pandemic. But here's a little statistic at the bottom that I found interesting. So in 2020, every second, 127 new devices are connected to the internet. So I find that to be pretty incredible. So you can just think about the scale, because when you think billions and billions and billions, it's hard to get your head around it. But 127 devices a second, I think, puts things into pretty good perspective. All right, speaking of IoT and then also transitioning to AI, wanted to talk a little bit about, so we talked about the connected home, and that was one of the big drivers. And so one of the things in the connected home is what we call these virtual assistants. So I want to give you some perspective on that. In 1961, there was a groundbreaking project from IBM called the Shoebox, which could understand 16 words and digits. The next iteration of AI, virtual assistant, if any of you guys remember back in the 90s, I say Office Assistant 1.0. This was Clippy. He was the little guy that would come up when you were opening an Excel file, trying to offer you some timely advice. And then nowadays, you think of things like these personal smart speakers, right? Over 100,000 skills now that a lot of these smart speakers can facilitate that are AI assisted. And given all that, though, ironically, the most popular command in 2020 is play music. My sense is that's because of COVID and the lockdown. So not a lot of Uber, ordering an Uber or asking about weather in different cities like people normally would. It's maybe more of a shelter in place trend, but we'll see how that evolves here in the future. So segueing some more into AI, the point I want to make here is the democratization of AI has really arrived. With this tagline here with sort of this fast food menu look and feel, have it your way. And this is all by design because it's become ubiquitous, right? It's everywhere. It's accessible across industries. It's completely customizable, as you can see from these different menu options. Of course, I have to point out, don't forget DRAM and storage as a memory supplier, but all the hardware, all the software, and all the AI add-ins are completely customizable per industry, per end customer. There's no one size fits all. It's exactly what any IT company would need or any IT department would need for their specific requirements. And what we're seeing now is about slightly over 40% of companies are now implementing AI. And ironically, one of the biggest barriers is the data quantity and data quality issues. So you think about all these connected devices, all these remote employees on Zoom calls, all this data shipped to, sold to, pricing, et cetera, having to manage all that in real time. That's really the biggest challenge for, I think, for AI is what this recent Forbes survey has been talking about. So speaking of quantity of data, we like to talk about this data tsunami, right? And how this is continuing. And I want to give you some perspective on this. So just small increase here over the last 30 years. It's increased about 150 million X since 1992. So look, 1992, about 100 gigabytes per day was the amount of global internet traffic. So to put that in perspective, that means your laptop today could fit the entire internet in 1992. Probably with some room to spare because most of you, I'm sure you all have SSDs. So maybe you have a 256 or a 512 or even a 1 terabyte. If you have a 1 terabyte SSD, that's 10 times of what the internet traffic was in 1992. And you can see where we're going, 150,000 gigabytes per second. So some context, in 1 second in 2020, about 50,000 Google searches and 106,000 YouTube videos watched. So again, capacity and bandwidth are going to have to continue to scale to support this data tsunami. And that's really at the underpinning of the semiconductor and memory industry, right? Is how we continue to enable this capacity and this bandwidth moving forward. So I want to wrap it up now with this slide here and talk about some of the memory innovations that are supporting this IT boom. So as we talked about on the opening slide, right, we have these 5 sort of pillars that are feeding this IT boom and have been doing so for the last several years. And from a memory perspective, again, from us, it's all about that TCO or that total cost of ownership, right? Making sure we have robust quality in place from cloud to client. Latency, what can we do at the device level to really get that latency down so that the memory is not the bottleneck at any point during the chain. Reliability, especially for things like autonomous cars and the electronification of cars, cloud servers, all these devices we take for granted. We want them to work and we need them to work all the time, especially in a remote environment. Density, obviously density matters for us because we have to keep up with the tsunami of data. And performance, another key attribute as we continue to go faster and faster and faster. Again, we want to make sure that we're pushing the performance curve. And time to insight, which is going to drive decision making for AI and also for other types of applications. And lastly, scale. It's no good if we can only build these things in sort of small volume. We have to be able to ramp these things for widespread adoption. So really, some final thoughts I want to leave you with here is number one is that the pace of change is accelerating, and because of the pandemic, that pace is obviously here, particularly in the last 3 or 4 months. And really, what's happening is companies across every industry need to rethink how they function in order to survive, in order to grow, and in order to sort of thrive and pivot and get to the next phase of their business as we transition through this pandemic. Second thing is the IT industry is actually pretty well positioned. Technology is going to facilitate this kind of innovation across all of these different industries. And then lastly, I just want to say Samsung as the world's #1 memory supplier. Our commitment is to continue to enable these new frontiers. You talk about all these different innovations, ways to collaborate, ways to make people's lives easier, the ability to allow or enable society to continue to adapt to all these changes. We want to make sure that we're at the forefront of everybody or of all of that and supporting everybody as we get through this pandemic together. So again, just want to give a big shout out to the organizers of the 6.5 Summit and say thank you so much for having me here at your virtual event. And I look forward to seeing you guys hopefully in person here real soon. So thanks again, everybody, and we'll see you later.